Welcome to this webcast presented by the Travis County Emergency Services District number 2, aka the Pflugerville Fire Department. I'm Clay Avery. I'm assisting ESD2 in this webcast. The webcast tonight will give you the opportunity to ask questions. Hopefully everybody's seeing me and getting this information. You can call in or text in your questions or comments at any time during tonight's broadcast. You don't have to wait for me to prompt you. Here's how you do that. You can call us at 512-251-8101. Folks are standing by to take those calls. Or you can text me right here at 512-750-1120. And normal text messaging rates may apply. And I also have to caution you, please don't call that phone because I'm not going to be able to answer you or assist you with any technical issues you might be having while I'm moderating this webcast. Now, we may not have time tonight to get to all the questions and comments, but we will respond to them on our website, www.pflugervillefire.org. Once that page is up, we're going to send out a link to everyone, all the registered participants here, so everyone can get a look at that. Now, let's go ahead and introduce tonight's presenters. April Griffin and Mike Howe are appointed members of the Travis County Emergency Services District number 2 Board of Commissioners. Ron Molenberg has been the chief of the Pflugerville Fire Department for about 40 years. Nick Perkins is the assistant chief. Tonight, they'll be talking about how the ESD and fire department provide fire protection and enhanced emergency medical care, including ambulance transport, to more than 140,000 people in northern Travis County. So let's take it away with the presentation.
So good evening, folks. So glad you took time out to be with us tonight. I'm Ron Molenberg. I'm the fire chief of the Pflugerville Fire Department, Travis County ESD number 2. What I want to do, share with you tonight, and what we'll attempt to do, is to provide you information about your fire department and how we perform to do the services that we provide in this district. So tonight, some of the things we'll accomplish with this presentation, we'll tell you a little bit more about who we are. We want to review with you our current EMS and fire service levels within the City of Pflugerville and the district as a whole. Another thing that we'll try to do tonight is review the upcoming advanced life support and EMS transport service funding challenges that we forecast. And we'll also discuss some of the options and solutions that we've examined in doing that. One of the things to remember about the fire service and things that we've been doing for many, many years is that a good fire department always plans for the worst scenario and hopes for the best, because we never know when a man-made or a natural disaster will occur in our community, and we have to be prepared for it so that we don't collapse and literally not be able to perform for you. So Travis County Emergency Services District number 2 and the Pflugerville Fire Department are actually one and the same. The Pflugerville Fire Department predates the Emergency Service District, and we actually began as a volunteer fire department in the community in 1955 when a group of concerned citizens formed the fire department, took up a collection to buy the first fire truck and begin service. And this was on the heels of the great drought of the 1950s that affected all of Texas, and really pointed out the need in our community for a fire department. And for the most part, the volunteer fire department worked as an all-volunteer organization, doing fundraising, training, answering emergencies, and generally doing all the things that the fire department was called upon to do. And as time went along, it became more and more apparent that there needed to be better financial stability in the department. So in 1985, the concerned citizens called for and got an elected approval of the community to form a rural fire protection district. That rural fire protection district survived up until 1992, when an emergency service district was created on the same boundaries, because they could no longer survive at the 3-cent tax limit that was constitutionally set. Our district, I guess it's there's been many significant changes in the district. But perhaps the most significant change was in 2017 when we added EMS, Emergency Medical Transport Services, to the list of services that we were providing. And that was because we were discovering that the old contracted service that was in place, that was a contract between Travis County and Austin Travis County EMS, we just weren't meeting the need in our community. 40% of the time, there was no advanced life support in our community, and ambulances were not readily available. Today, we're covering about 77 square miles of territory in Northeast Travis County. And within that 77 square miles, there's at least 130,000 residents. And I know that some people say, wow, Pflugerville Fire Department, that's only the city of Pflugerville. And we know and we hear that the city of Pflugerville is only 70,000 people. Well, as you can see, that's really only about half of the people that we serve in our community. This last year, we responded to over 10,000 calls for emergency services, and it results in over 20,000 unit responses, because many times the emergency that is being felt in the community requires more than one fire truck. This is not the Texas Rangers. We don't have one ranger for one range war. We have to bring enough people with the right amount of equipment to deal with the emergency, whether it's an automobile accident on Pecan Street or it's somebody's home or business that's on fire. So just because we made 10,000 calls, there's a far greater demand on service and units. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we do, to sum it up, we provide all fire and rescue services, and that's in all hazards. So it doesn't matter whether it's rescue and extrication out of a vehicle accident or a lost person, it's an all hazard sort of thing. Some of the other things that we do is EMS basic life support, and that's the basic services that we've provided since the beginning. And as I pointed out a moment ago, in 2017, we stepped into the breach and began providing advanced life support and EMS transport services. We also provide fire code administration, plan review, and fire marshal services. So we have a community risk reduction program that we look at commercial business plans as they come about, make sure that they build according to the current fire codes, and that we enforce to make sure that those codes are adhered to, so that people who live in and visit our community, when they go to a restaurant to dine or go to some other entertainment, that they're going into a safe and regulated facility. And as I said before, in 2017, one of the most significant things that we did to change the complexion here was began providing advanced life support and EMS transport service. And this is the service that is at risk. This is what we're talking about. This is what we are looking to the future for, to try to ensure that we can continue doing that. Today, our district operates out of 5 fire stations, 4 of which are located inside the city of Pflugerville. A 6th fire station in the planning stages right now will be located just off Weiss Lane, next to Weiss High School. It is in a pre-construction phase in engineering at this time. So out of our fire stations, we're operating 5 ambulances. All the ambulances operate within the city and around the district on a daily basis. Prior to 2017, Austin EMS provided service to the district using only 2 ambulances that were stationed in this district. In 2019, 3,760 of our 7,800 EMS incidents were within the city. And that statistic I give to you merely to point out that about a half of what we do is in the city of Pflugerville, whereas the other half is in areas just outside the city. Next slide. So for those of you who may be new to the community or not really understand, this map is the geography of our district, the blue, and then overlaid on it is a purple color that shows the city limits of Pflugerville. So just like the call volume, which is about half and half, the same will be true for the geography that we cover. Now, what is important to note, because if some of you are really astute and see on the map, you're just on the edge of Pflugerville, and the population density within your area is just as dense as it is elsewhere. So we look at the district as a whole. It's hard for us to isolate and look at one piece of geography versus the other unless it's within the district as a whole. Next slide. So here's the crux of the matter. A couple of years ago, as we realized the change in effect of new legislation that was going to regulate the amount of revenue that taxing entities were going to be able to see, we began to look out across the future to determine what our future would mean in this new regulated confine or the way we do business. The important thing on this graph, it represents two things. Number one, it represents the call volume year by year, as well as compared to the property tax revenue. Now, I don't want, because many people look at this slide and get confused about call volume versus revenue. What is important here is the rate of change. The rate of change is the important thing. So if you look at our EMS and fire responses, how that rate has taken off since 2017, it's growing exponentially. The revenue rate has been rather steady over the years, and in fact, this coming year flattens out. The problem is when these two lines begin to intersect with one another, that's the problem that we're forecasting and looking at. And with that, I'm going to call on Chief Perkins to pick up from here and begin delving with this problem a little bit more in depth.
Thank you, Chief, and good evening, everyone. So to talk a little bit more about our funding and our challenges, we all need to understand how an ESD is funded. And it's important to understand that when ESDs were created in the late 80s, they were to fund primarily volunteer fire departments through property tax. And so that we need to remember that. We also need to acknowledge that the cost of providing emergency medical transport services, including advanced life support, are incredibly expensive services to deliver. And then most recently, with the last legislature, we have the legislature introducing Senate Bill 2, which significantly limited the district's growth, or ability to grow our budget. And for most of you that may or may not be familiar with Senate Bill 2, we began tracking it very early on in the legislature. And the Texas Property Tax Reform and Transparency Act made several changes to the processes for government agencies in adopting their tax rates. The most significant is that an election is now mandatory if the voter approval rate is set above 3.5%. This limits the district's ability to keep up with growth. For an entity like an ESD, we're limited by a 10-cent cap in the Texas Constitution, and then now we're limited by a growth cap. Keep in mind, we were included initially in the legislative process along with community colleges and health districts to be exempted from this legislation, but did not survive that exemption throughout the process. And it wasn't for lack of trying. But again, ESDs collectively are primarily rural volunteer type agencies, and our grassroots effort at the Capitol wasn't successful there. So we want to talk a little bit about what the average homeowner pays for our services. This is a breakdown of a typical homeowner's tax bill in the city of Pflugerville. And so we like to point out that we're about 4% of that total tax bill. And so for an average home in Pflugerville that's valued at $257,000, now you're going to pay about $21 a month for our services. Now, when we talk about how we compare, it's important to acknowledge a few things. When we compare fire departments are usually funded through an emergency service district like we are, or they're financed or funded through a municipal model. And we face several challenges compared to municipal fire departments, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those. So ESD funding, we have to pay for everything under that 10-cent cap. That's operations, that's our capital improvement, that's our debt service, our fleet operations, our administrative support, all of our labor costs is all under that cap. Compared to municipal funding, when you look at the fire department budget in a municipal budget, you're typically only going to see salaries and then direct operational support programs. What you're not going to see are fleet, capital improvement, and other large items that may come from other funds. And additionally, cities have multiple options with what they do with their debt service. We do not. And obviously their caps are much higher, and it's a different funding mechanism, so it's important to acknowledge that. So when we talk about how do we compare as an ESD, what we have for you here is a comparison of all of the ESDs in Travis County, and the highlighted line with the red arrow, that is ESD2, that is our district, and we have our cost per capita highlighted here at $184, and then we have our cost per incident at $2,445. So as you can see, we are a very efficient service, and we provide a tremendous amount of service, including advanced life support and emergency medical services. Most of these entities do not. And as you can see, there's very few entities that are able to provide the efficiency and the cost at the scale that we're doing. And so how are we funded in fiscal year 2021? We have a property tax revenue stream, which accounts for $13.2 million. And again, that's based on our ad valorem tax. We also collect sales tax, which, as the fire chief will tell you, is the only reason we are able to do what we are able to do, or we have been able to do what we've been able to do to this day. And sales tax revenue is at $12.8 million. And then the district also has a few other smaller revenue streams that come in the way of fees, grants, and other sources. And so our total budget in fiscal year 2021 is $29.1 million. So forecasting our needs. To determine our future needs, we have been updating and reviewing multiple forecast scenarios. On the next slide, I'm going to show you the best, kind of middle of the road and worst case scenarios that we're looking at. Those scenarios assume that the district continues providing the same services that we do today, which is at a baseline will cause our budget to increase slightly each year due to the rising costs of services, supplies, and labor costs. If this were the only increase forecasted, the district would be able to continue providing service under the current revenue structure. The issue is that the district's expenses are increasing at a more significant rate in the upcoming years due to the need for additional stations, equipment, and staffing in order to meet the call volume increase and maintain our response times. The forecasts on the next slide depict our baseline expenditure increases as well as lump sum increases for construction of stations 6 and 7, and then the added equipment and personnel needed for those stations. There is also a multi-year project that we are working on to provide repair and improvements to our training facility. A training facility is needed to maintain our services and train our firefighter, EMT, and paramedics to deliver the services that they do today. So like I had mentioned previously, we have our best case scenario our conservative, and then our worst case scenario illustrated here. The expense amounts are exactly the same in each of these three scenarios. The difference is the revenue. The expenses shown include both operational and capital outlay expense. The dip in expenses reflected in FY24 represent a decrease in capital expenditures as we move past the large capital outlay for stations 6 and 7 that are forecasted to occur in FY22 and 23. It's important to note that all forecasts are just educated guesses of what the future will hold, and in the current environment, certainly the COVID environment, and the history of the past 7 months, we have to remain extremely conservative and nimble to the potential economic curveballs that may be thrown our way. The largest sources of revenue for the district are property and sales taxes. Forecasting these two revenue sources is challenging given the happenings of the past 7 months and the unknown long-term economic impact and consequences. Property tax revenue forecasting is further complicated by the recent Senate Bill 2 limitations that we previously discussed, including TCAD changes to the property valuation process. Remember, with Senate Bill 2, the district is only able to increase our revenue from existing property by 3.5% each year. The voter approval rate, which represents the max increase of 3.5% in revenue mandated by Senate Bill 2, was 0.1025 for 2020. This exceeded the district's cap of 10 cents. So the district actually adopted a lower rate than the voter approval rate, which equated to a 2.6 revenue increase on existing property. The overall property tax revenue increase from FY20 to 21 is projected to be around 6.3%, as this includes tax revenue from new properties brought onto the tax roll, and new properties aren't included in the voter approval rate calculation in the year they are added in. The best case scenario assumes an increase of property tax revenue of 6% from FY21 to 22, then 5%, 4%, and 3% in the following fiscal years. It remains to be seen what the collection rate will be for the 2020 tax assessment, which is important because with the current economy, just because we send someone a tax bill doesn't mean they will actually be able to pay it. The best case scenario assumes an increase of sales tax revenue of 10% increase from FY21 to 22, then down to 9%, 8%, and 7% in FY25. We ratchet down the increase in the out years to remain conservative even in the best case scenario. The conservative forecast scenario assumes an increase of property tax revenue of 4.6% from FY21 to 22, then 2.5%, 3.5%, and 3.4%. Property growth has seen historic levels in the Pflugerville area, and this scenario was forecasted to illustrate what might happen if it stalled and then maybe recovered slowly. Sales tax is forecasted at an increase of 3% per fiscal year. Mirroring property tax revenue, this scenario illustrates a leveling out of growth in sales tax revenue. The district has experienced drastic swings in sales tax revenue over the past few months, so we wanted a scenario that depicts waning growth in case that becomes the new norm for us. The worst case scenario assumes a 2% annual growth in both property and sales tax revenue. The average increase in revenue from FY15 to FY20 for both property and sales tax is around 3% per year. However, the estimated increase from FY19 to FY20 for property tax revenue is estimated to be just over 9% and just over 8% for sales tax, illustrating a decline in revenue growth for both main revenue sources for the district. We've already seen a further decline as expected property tax to just over 6% for FY21 and have forecasted it conservatively. The impact of all three scenarios can readily be extracted from the graphs. Our expenses are outpacing our revenue growth, and the district reserves are being utilized in all three scenarios. Given that the district is a standalone entity, reserves are crucial to ensuring the continuing operation of the district in the case of an emergency, like a pandemic, a wildfire, or other disaster that we have historically responded to, or economic decline. The reserve shouldn't be utilized each year to fund ongoing operations. As the fire chief reminds us, it's no way to build a railroad. So we are an organization that was built on fundraisers, bake sales, and barbecues. Our fire chief used to cook at the barbecue fundraisers. He can speak to this experience. We understand the importance of financial stability as a governmental agency. It's our #2 strategic priority behind workforce safety, doing a dangerous job. Simple thoughts of fundraising, cutting budgets, trimming budgets, adding user fees do not solve the complex problem that's facing the community. We are an essential service that ultimately is delivered by people. And if we're going to reduce and cut budgets, it's going to involve cutting people and those services. We opened our 5th fire station in 2020. That was our first fire station in over 20 years. And in order to keep up with growth, the analysis to maintain our response times reveals that we need at least 2 additional stations in order to meet and maintain our current service and response times. Our response times are growing, and we provide time-dependent services. And why are response times important? Well, generally speaking, we know in an emergency medical incident such as a cardiac arrest that occurs about every other day in the district, after about 10 minutes of non-intervention, the chance for a successful outcome for that patient is 0. Every minute that we are not there to render care represents a decline in percentage of about 10% in the chance of survival for that person. On the fire side, we know a fire can grow and become inescapable in as little as 3 minutes. Faster is better in emergencies. So lastly, talking about the topic at hand, emergency medical services. The district began providing these services, like Chief mentioned, because of an overwhelming need based on the previous arrangement being provided by Austin Travis County EMS through an interlocal agreement between Travis County and the City of Austin was inadequate. Prior to 2017, a plan to fund these services through an agreement between the district, the City of Pflugerville, and Travis County was originally agreed to, but ultimately fell through due to the political atmosphere at the time. Today, we operate 5 ambulances. We have a 6th in planning as we continue to monitor our utilization and response times, and all operate within the City of Pflugerville today, with 4 of those being located and the 6 also being planned to be located in the City of Pflugerville. There are 3 ways to deliver EMS in a community. The first is a third-party system. This is what we saw with Austin Travis County EMS. And I want to be real clear, the men and women of Austin Travis County EMS are great people. I spent the majority of my career working with these people. They're great people. But they are, by and large, the most expensive way to provide this service. And you can see their costs. It's about $1.5 million startup, and then between 1.2 and 1.4, depending on the use of demand units to deliver that service. The next option is a fire-based system, which is what's currently being delivered. A fire-based delivered system, as you can see, has a startup cost of $1.1 million, and then can operate the ambulance for about $665,000. The difference is the economies of scale of taking advantage of a standing group of first responders who are already placed in the community. All firefighters in the district are EMTs, with many being paramedics. There's also a reduction in duplicative services in terms of management, command structure. You don't have to training. You don't have to do all that with a fire-based system because it already exists. In a third-party system, you have to duplicate all of that. It drives costs. And then your last option is a for-profit system, and it can range from a subsidy payment from the governmental entity to solely profit-driven from bills collected from the end user. It can be the most expensive option for the individual community member, and it's also considered the lowest level of service. And we believe in our professional assessment that it is the worst option for the community for 911 services. So here is where we're at. We have proposed 4 solutions and we're going to review those briefly. The first option is to do nothing, and this certainly is not a solution. It does not solve the problem. It buys us time and will eventually lead to option B, and will increase response times, maintenance costs. It will create recruitment and retention problems for the district, and will obviously impact critical outcomes. Option B is to reduce or eliminate services altogether. The district would cease providing EMS service, and the City of Pflugerville and/or Travis County would be left to provide these services. Option C would involve the establishment of an agreement between the district, the City of Pflugerville, and Travis County for at least $6 million in supplemental funding annually to sufficiently maintain the current levels of advanced life support and emergency medical transport services. And then option D is a voter-driven creation of an overlay district to fund EMS and preserve advanced life support and emergency medical transport services in the community. On the topic of Austin-Travis County EMS, it's important to acknowledge a few things. So a frequently asked question would be, why doesn't Austin-Travis County EMS just return to providing the service? Well, they previously were providing the service and were unable to do so adequately. They were gone 44% of the time in 2013 when we began examining the growing response times and examining solutions for the need at that time. And again, they're the most expensive option that's available. Today, Austin-Travis County still struggles to meet the current demand that they face today. Can the district raise fees to cover the costs is another question. We're in the process of doing that. It is very difficult for us to do that, but we are moving forward with that. This is very unpopular, particularly to the people who are receiving these fees and having to pay these. But you gotta remember on the issue of emergency medical transport, a large number of the people that we treat rely on Medicare, and Medicare is currently maxed out at what they will pay for emergency medical transport services. Keep in mind, we also have a lot of people that live in poverty. They can't pay these bills. And then we also hear, well, won't commercial growth cover the need? And certainly commercial growth helps. You know, we fully acknowledge that. But let's take an example. Let's take a commercial building that comes on the tax rolls at $250 million. So certainly we're going to get property tax from that building, about $250,000. That won't quite cover half the cost of an ambulance. Keep in mind, though, as this business comes in here, it will add to the traffic. If it's a business that employs, let's say, 1,000 people, those people are going to need places to live, which will also drive our service demand. So certainly these things help, but they are not long-term solutions for us right now. On the topic of option D, an overlay, people will ask, is it a separate entity? And yes, it is a separate taxing entity that is funded to allow the Pflugerville Fire Department to continue to provide emergency medical services, including advanced life support and ambulance transport. What would the boundaries be? The same as the ESD2 boundaries. What would the tax rate be? Currently, we're aware of a petition being circulated by a citizen group and the Firefighters Association that would call for the Texas Constitution max of 10 cents per $100 of assessed property value. However, based on our analysis, we believe about 6 to 7 cents would be needed to fund EMS. However, it's important to acknowledge this is a theoretical projection and conversation, and ultimately the board of a newly created ESD would have to determine and set that rate. And then what are the incremental costs? We have projected a 3% per year revenue growth in FY24 and 25 to project potential property value increases that keeps us below the 3.5 revenue growth limit set by Senate Bill 2. So if growth and value trends continue, this additional revenue will come as a result of property value increases or additions of new property. That's assuming the tax rate was set at 4 cents And if the values don't increase and there are no new properties, then we would propose a tax rate increase. To increase the revenue in FY24 by 3%, the tax rate would be approximately 0.0412. In FY25 would be 0.0424. So that concludes the presentation for the staff. At this point, we would like to turn it over to our panel and the moderator and begin to take questions from the audience.
We are back, and welcome back. Assistant Chief Perkins, I understand there's one point of clarification we need to make about something during the presentation, if you want to make that right now.
Yeah, thanks, Clay. I apologize. On slide 15, I described our average increase in revenue from FY15 to FY20 for property and sales tax at around 3%. It's actually 13%. So my apologies for that. The slide was correct. I just said it incorrectly.
Okay. Excellent. So we should be back fully with everybody. Before we get to the questions, really quickly, I want to introduce Jessica Frazier and Victor Gonzalez. Jessica is the Director of Finance, and Victor is the Logistics Director. So I believe we are getting enough, I'm getting texts about technical questions. I hope we're back on track here. We're going to keep going. There's a recording being made of this, so we'll make that available. I want to make sure that we're back, but let's go ahead and get with the questions. Like I said, Jessica, Victor, welcome to the rest of the panel. Let's move on with the questions. Our first question is from Anthony Nguyen, who lives in the northern portion of the district. How much does the ESD2 budget revenues have to increase each year to remain sustainable? If our population grows 3% per year, how much does the ESD budget have to increase to meet demand? So, Chief, you want to go ahead and take that question? Chief, you're muted.
Now, should that be better? I hope.
You're good.
Thanks, Clay. Currently, our projections show that in the worst case scenario, our revenue streams are going to need to grow an additional 6.5 cents per $100 of assessed property value in order for us to maintain our current levels of service in the area of advanced life support and the ambulance transport system. The second part of the question, while we talk about population growth, and population is no doubt a very important metric for us, the real determinant is the number of calls that the Pflugerville Fire Department responds to. And so certainly with more people, there's going to be more calls for help. But we can't just think in terms of one call per individual, because there is no predictable statistic that tells us how often any one individual is going to call for help. And so since ESD2 began providing advanced life support and ambulance service, our response to emergencies has increased 40%. So in an effort to respond to increased service demand and to do it in a timely manner, it requires the district to put fire stations, equipment, and personnel in the growth areas of the community. And as we noted earlier in the presentation, the 5th fire station with EMS has just been added, and as revenues become available, fire stations 6 and 7 will need to be built. So these capital costs also drive up and add to our budget.
Okay. And I thank you, Chief. And I think we've got our technical issues. We're back on, and everything was good before that question. So as I said, we are making a recording of this town hall, so that'll be available. Let's go to a question about sort of ESD governance. Now, The question comes from Becky in West Pflugerville. Who makes decisions regarding the ESD? Is there a board? If so, how is it chosen? Mike Howe, you've served on the ESD2 board longer than I think anyone at this point. Would you like to take that one?
Sure, Clay, thanks. I think that's an honor, by the way. I believe it is. So, well, actually, according to the state law, we are appointed by the Travis County Commissioners Court. We serve 2 years, and then it's up to the court to reappoint us if they so desire. Every year, or I think it's every 2 years, every commissioner has to complete 6 hours of high-level training from an accredited group providing that training. And Clay, I think it's right. It's 6 hours every 2 years, I believe. So like I said, appointed by the Travis County Commissioners Court, and we get reappointed at their will.
Excellent. Okay, moving right along. Let's go to a question from Laura in Kantara Meadows. Objectively, what are the pros of options 2 and 3 and the cons of option 4? April, you want to take that one maybe?
You're muted, April.
You're muted, April.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you for your submission, Laura. As it relates to option 2, which is also option B, which would be the reduction or elimination of the EMS services, which would include the ALS or transport services, the actual advantages of that, along with the advantages of option C, which would, or option 3, as noted in your question, would be that there's no tax increase that the constituents would have to pay. However, the balance to that is that the elimination and reduction of EMS services. So in option number 2, we would not be able to fund it anymore. So if we have that shortfall that continues, then we're not going to be able to provide those services. We're not going to be able to provide the ALS or the transport services that we're providing currently. And then with option number 3, which would be if we were to be able to enter into an agreement with the county or the City of Pflugerville for them to provide the additional funding, then that also would result in no taxpayer increase. However, you know, there may be a problem with that in the sense that they may also have revenue issues. They are also under the Senate Bill 2 requirements. So there may be limited revenue for them and their ability to be able to provide that excess funding, which as noted, may be approximately about $6 million. The other part of your question is what's the negative, well, I don't want to say negative, but what's the cons associated with option number 4, which would be the overlay, option D. And that would be that it will result in a tax increase for our constituents within the district, including City of Pflugerville constituents. And the thing with that is that you have to think about what are you getting in return for that. The tax increase would, I believe the numbers, don't quote me on this, reflected that on an average $300,000 house, that would be an increase of about $195 per year. So with that maybe not in this economy and what's going on right now, that may not seem minuscule, but in comparison to the services that are being provided and the level of services and quality of services that the district provides in providing that ALS and transport when your loved one is needed of those services, then that $195 might not seem so much of a big deal. So when you ask what's the disadvantages or the cons would be the increase in the taxes at those dollar amounts.
Okay. Next question, Herbert from Gatlinburg. He'd like ESD2 to address the need for more fire, EMS, and police protection on the east side of Pflugerville. Nick, do you want to maybe weigh in on that one?
Yeah, sure. We definitely understand the need for having fire protection and emergency medical service, including ambulance transport in the eastern part of the district. Those areas are fast growing. We're currently in the advanced planning stages of fire station number 6. We acquired land at almost no cost at the corner of Weiss Lane and Wolfpack Drive. We're also looking at additional sites up along the Hoddy Lane area. And then we have an additional site off of Cameron Road. So we're looking at those. We have plans. Certainly that is part of our long-term future and a lot of what we're talking about tonight. I think it's important to acknowledge that we're a separate government entity from the City of Pflugerville or Travis County. So we don't provide police services or parks, roads, water service. We only provide fire, EMS, and ambulance service. Now we drive those roads and we'd like them to be in good shape, but we don't maintain them.
Different governmental entity. Excellent. So let's go to some more questions. Let's just keep it rolling. Okay. Questions. Lakeway has been successful in advocating to the commissioner's court. Okay, so did Pflugerville make attempts to get the commissioner's court to add ambulances before opting to provide your own transport? Chief, I think you could probably answer that one, right?
Yeah, Clay. Yes, we did try to get more ambulances brought into the district through the agreement with Travis County and Austin Travis County EMS. And the bottom line was the cost and the politics that were associated with that. We were lucky to get the second unit that was out at Station 3 at the time. And this all occurred in the early 2000s as we worked directly with the Director of Emergency Services at Travis County to try and improve the services. Because even in those years, we were seeing a decline in the response time. In other words, it was taking longer to get advanced life support to the people that needed it. And the fact that even at the best of times, when we did have 2 ambulances from that interlocal agreement, 40% of the time they were not in the district because they were transporting patients to the hospital or involved in other calls. So the short answer is yes, we did try, but it evolves around the cost of doing that.
Excellent. Okay, so how many times has an EMS overlay been attempted in Pflugerville/ESD2? What were the years and why did it not pass? Mike, you have the history on that, maybe?
Oh, whoa. Okay. If my memory serves me, it was probably 8 years ago, 2012. There was a petition filed at the Commissioner's Court, and they made the decision at that time. It was probably in 2013 that they made the decision not to go forward with it. So there was a petition to do it in 2012, and then in 2013, if I remember correctly, the Commissioner's Court decided not to go forward. So that's the history of it.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question. Okay, this one kind of was addressed it's kind of a repeat of an earlier question, but let's see. Could option B mean ATC EMS supplementing ESD2 services, or is option B suggesting that they will completely eliminate EMS services? I'll go to April here because you kind of already in that earlier question touched on that. Do you just want to kind of run through options 2 and 3, B and C, whatever you want to call them again?
Again, option 2 would be the elimination or reduction of services should we not be able to obtain additional funding. And option C would be if we were to be able to further an agreement between the county and the City of Pflugerville and the ESD to continue to provide the services, and for those other jurisdictions to provide funding or services to the city, which would be approximately about $6 million to estimate the needs of supporting the 5 ambulances that we currently have, and with our plans for growth for the 6 and the 7 in order to accommodate the future needs of the district.
And that's $6 million a year?
Yeah, and if Clay, in April, I was just going to add on to that I don't want to leave out the part that's $6 million, $3 million from each entity every year. And I don't think any of them, Pflugerville or Travis County, are prepared to do that at this point. But I think that's what I think people need to understand it. It's annually. So
what this questioner just wrote in, again, kind of addressing this question. They're saying eliminate in that option 2, when you reduce services, is it possible for ATC EMS to bring back those 2 ambulances? I think, April, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is that's essentially option 3.
Yes.
That becomes then option 3 if you start partnering with another governmental entity like ATC EMS. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes, you are. And note that even if they were to bring in the 2 ambulances, that was not enough back in 2017. Right. So to try to bring that back in now, when we actually provide 5 ambulances with the plan for 6, that would definitely not meet the needs of what is the future shortfall, because 2 ambulances in place of 5 would be insufficient. So yes.
And I think it's worth pointing out that because of our ability to keep the costs down in operating the ambulances, we're operating those at about half of what Austin Travis County EMS is. It's somewhat complicated to understand those differences, but I think it's important to point out that we're able to put them on the street for about half the cost. So.
Okay, kind of keeping in that same question, are Pflugerville residents paying for ATC EMS through their county taxes? Does that mean that they are paying for a service that they do not receive?
They receive it through Travis County ESD2, but not based off of the taxes that they're paying for it. We've actually covered those costs for this time. So they're paying for a service that they're getting through the district and not through the county. So if that answers your question. So yes, they're paying for the service. However, we are not being given those funds to supplement the cost that we are incurring as a district to provide those ALS and transport services.
Currently, the EMS service Pflugerville ESD2 residents receive is coming from the district, not the county. Is that my understanding?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But we do continue to ask the county, and we continue to raise the issue with the county, and we hope that those conversations will continue, and eventually we will get some additional funding for that what our constituents are paying for currently.
Excellent. Again, we have some issues with the 2 and the 3, but I feel like I want to try to move on to get everybody's questions that we can. Okay, so these next questions are this is all from the same questioner, so I'm going to see if I can. Okay, these are about growth. How much has sales tax increased over the year? Can that growth support the ESD's growth? What's the rate of change in total revenues? And sort of along those lines, if SB2 limits you to 3.5% in tax increase, but the rate of change is still below CPI inflation rate. Jessica, as the director of finance, can you kind of address the general question of revenues are going up? There is a growth in revenues, but why are those what are those growth in revenues, and how do they relate to the need, that's the growing need that ESD2 is experiencing?
Yes. So the revenue has grown over the years and has grown similarly in line with the growth of the district. So more properties, more people moving here means more property taxes. The issue is that the growth in that revenue, and we also do get sales tax revenue, it's not enough to keep up with these lump sum expenses that we have for building new stations and hiring new employees. So if we were just maintaining our services based on a flat call volume or a moderate increase in call volume, then the CPI would make sense to compare, because then our expenses would rise with CPI. So cost of services and goods that we purchase for providing the services that we do. So we have that issue, but then we also have the fact that we're having to build new stations and fill those stations with both equipment and people in bulk. So it's not like we are only hiring 2 or 3 people a year. We're having to hire 15 and 20 new firefighters to be able to support responding from those stations, and the fire trucks that go along with it, which are very expensive, and all the equipment that goes along with it. So do you think I answered all the questions, or is there?
Based on what I understand, that there are other costs that are, it's not a simple one-to-one in terms of X amount of people come in and they bring in X amount of revenues, but the cost growth is almost exponential in the sort of capital expenditures and long-term planning expenses to try to meet that growth. Is that correct?
And the growth percentage, and I think Nick mentioned it in his presentation, because I just remembered, I think that was another question. On average, our sales and property tax growth has been on average about 13%. But in the last fiscal year, which just came to an end, so we're wrapping all that up, we're seeing those percentages decline. And also, as Nick said, with the uncertainty in the economy and everything that's going on, we have to be really conservative in our forecasts, because we don't want to end up in a situation where we have our expenditures exceeding our revenues. So we have a good reserve at this point, but it's not a good financial approach to rely on your reserves to support your daily operations on an ongoing basis. And that's kind of what we're looking at, even in our best case scenario. So that's part of the concern.
Okay. And if Clay, if I could add to that, one of the things that you realize over time, as development grows, as more houses get on the ground, what you call in growth issues, rooftops. Rooftops have a high demand for the emergency services, but they don't collectively pay for the total amount of the costs of those services. So there has to be this balance between commercial and residential. And in any situation anywhere in the state of Texas, if you have just residential property or more residential property that have such high demand, it puts bigger strains on emergency services, but they don't return the amount of money and revenue in property tax or sales tax to balance out that extra. So in any community that grows, we're constantly chasing the growth, trying to meet the needs, and then make sure we can keep up with that. So this is something I think people need to understand, that that's the sort of business we're in as far as delivering emergency services, but it's constantly chasing bigger growth. And people in Northern Travis County know this. All of us know in the district. This is one of the fastest growing areas, and it keeps growing. So I think it's worth pointing that out, that it's easy to say, well, why does, let's put these numbers like that, but understand where the demand's coming from. And that's from when you have rooftops. So
I do want to mention as well that the presentation from tonight, the slideshow presentation, that is going to be, it should have been available in your link that you got telling you how to access this webcast. There should have been a PDF link, and that's going to be available to see some of those figures that I know Assistant Chief Perkins went over in some of the presentation. And so I want to make sure that everyone knows that they can get their hands on those numbers. We kind of made a commitment to have you all out of here in an hour, so we're pretty close to done. We have another one that came in. It's more of a statement of support than a question for ESD2. Good evening. I am Mike Pearson. I am a retired AFD captain that served on Travis County ESD 8, aka Pedernales Fire Rescue, for 15 years. About a year ago, ESD 8 did a new ESD overlay for enhanced EMS service, and it is working well and has allowed for an improved EMS response. Clarification, I was a Travis County ESD 8 commissioner for 15 years. Travis 18, Pedernales is help me out here, western part of the county, right? Northwestern. So That's from someone who's been in.
I think BK Lakeway area out that way. So.
I think it's even farther out than that.
Oh, is it further out? Okay.
It's pretty far out there in some hilly terrain and out by the river. So that is a statement from someone who has had experience with the overlay option out in West Travis County. Okay, it is 8 o'clock on the dot, and I think we are going to go ahead and let everyone go. Thank you so much to our panel of folks for being here tonight. Thank you to all of you viewers who hopefully got something out of this. Thank you for joining us. If we couldn't get to your question or your comment, we're going to try to post responses soon on our website. We're going to have those up at www.pflugervillefire.org. Be checking that for more information on the future of your fire department. We'll also have a recording of this town hall available in case you missed anything, want to go back and check it out. Again, thank you so much for joining us, caring enough about your fire department to spend an hour with us. From right here in Pflugerville, I'm Clay Avery. Y'all have a great night.